I know we talked about a lot of celebrations for closed won, and for a lot of organizations, typically their go-to-market lifecycle process ends there. But as a former VP of customer success, I know that that's not the end. That's just the beginning of the relationship that you're going to have with your customer and all of the work that's left to do. Because of this, we have customer lifecycle stages, and it's a really important way to measure the health and progression of your customers through the life cycle that they're going to go through with your product or service. Similar to the sales stages, these may look very different for your business, but I want to give you an example to get you started. So let's go sequentially from left to right. I always like to have a pre-onboarding stage. There's often cases where you engage the customer success team in an implementation process, you engage them in an onboarding plan, or you just want to get them introduced to the customer before anything is formally signed. Because of that, it still works for the customer success team. Those accounts need to be on their radar, and having a space to designate that is very important. So we include a pre-onboarding stage just for any work that needs to be done before that account moves to closed won. Once the account has moved to closed won, typically the first stage is going to be an onboarding stage. So this is where you get introduced to your customer success manager or your service team. You start to outline a roadmap for how you're going to implement the product or service, and you start to outline the success criteria of what it means for that customer to be successful with your product. Following onboarding, you'll have actual implementation. This may be more technical or may be more process oriented, but there's going to be a point in time where you're implementing something for the customer in order to get successful. The goal of onboarding and implementation is always to get them to first time to value as soon as possible. We usually designate this as an early adoption phase. So once they have achieved first time to value, they're starting to get that actual value out of your product and starting to get results and starting also to operate and work on the product themselves. This is a good time to move it into that early adoption phase and formally move them out of that onboarding and implementation phase. Once your customers are pros with your product or they're getting the maximum value out of your product, this is a good time to move them into a mature adoption phase. For most companies, once you get a customer to this mature adoption phase, the risk of churn is extremely low. Just like with sales and marketing, customer lifecycle stages have their own entry criteria as well. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at what that might look like for you, and feel free to use this as a template for your business too. As mentioned earlier, pre-onboarding essentially is just any work that needs to be engaged from your customer success or customer service team prior to closed won. So no real entry criteria needed other than needing help from the customer success team. Once a prospect has moved to closed won and become a customer, this should automatically move them into this onboarding phase. What do you need to do as a business to get them up to speed as quickly as possible and getting the most value out of your product? Again, this may look different for your business. So sometimes onboarding might be a quick email. Sometimes onboarding might be a couple weeks of scoping. But whatever that means to you, it's important to designate when that customer is in onboarding and when that onboarding has been completed and they've left to the next stage. If you have a technical product, it's very likely that you'll have an implementation stage. This stage ensures that they're getting the product connected and integrated and set up to meet their needs. And once that has been completed, and once they're getting their first time to value, you can move them to early adoption. To stay with the analogy of closed won, for customer success, early adoption is really that closed won stage. This is the time where the customer has achieved their first time to value and the risk of churn becomes much, much lower than not making it out of onboarding or implementation. So designating this stage as a really clear goal for customer success to get their customers to is very important. Early adoption might look different for a lot of different types of companies. For some companies, it may be a certain level of utilization with your product. And for others, it may be actual outcomes and success criteria for your customer with your product. Whatever that definition is, the important part is to clearly define it, communicate it with your customer, and understand what it takes to get from onboarding to first time to value. Once your customers are pros with your product and they're getting the full value out of what you offer, this is a good time to move them into that mature adoption phase. One thing to note is that mature adoption may be in one phase for one product or service that you have, But your customer may go through these life cycle stages again if you're adding additional products or services across the life cycle of their relationship with you.